I'm Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich, a former prisoner of conscience in Soviet Russia. Stay tuned to a tape with Rabbi Doug.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight.
But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. It is my great pleasure and honor to have someone on my show today who I've always wanted to have on, and he's here in the Chicago area, so I'm glad I was able to invite him to join me. Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich. Baruch haba.
Shalom Aleichem.
It is a pleasure, first of all, to have you on the show. Your name is a household name for those who know Jewish history connected to Israel history with Russian Jewish history. And you are someone who's probably one of the two most famous, known as Refuseniks, or prisoners of conscience. As I understand, from my knowledge of you and your family, your father was arrested by the Soviet Union when you were 10 years old. And what crime did they charge him with, first of all?
An economical
An economical activity. But it really was based that he was a Jew, is that not true?
Yeah, I believe so. For later, we found a lawyer that found that he is unguilty and he was released from prison.
And so you started really being an activist as a young child when your father was arrested, and you were just, what, 10 years old?
Yeah.
So around 16 years old, you started to worry about the plight of Soviet Jewry. Were you brought up with any religiosity in your home? Was there Judaism in your home at all?
Not at all. No.
But you knew you were Jewish.
You know, just to mention that I was born in Latvia, and all my parents and grandparents are coming from Dymshits, which is a known Jewish place. So even not being a believer, religious man, my father picked up a lot of like Yiddishkeit. You know, I remember myself that he would sing like Shir Hashirim, just by itself. Also, he was a communist, but still remembered what he heard, studied in a cheder. And my mother accomplished in Hebrew gymnasium in Dymshits.
Really?
So she was knowledgeable. My Zayde was Neshama Shavrovichala. So we have good roots.
Yeah.
But then
good yichus.
Yeah, good yichus. But then it got spoiled.
So at 16, when you started to worry about the plight of Soviet Jewry as it was, what could you do as a 16-year-old, as a teenager, when you know that people go to jail, it's illegal to study, for the most part, Judaism? How do you become an activist as a teenager when you know that you're putting your own life in danger in some way?
No, I never thought about that there is dangers. I had no knowledge what's happening with people that would be involved in these kind of activities, and it never bothered me. Even later on, when I was aware that I'm doing something illegal, I was never bothered. For, you know, people do whatever they like to do, and it is what I like to do, to be Jewish and work for my nation. So why should I be afraid of doing that?
That's amazing. So there's so many things about you that I find inspiring. First of all, of course, you're most famous for probably at one point, and I'm not sure how old you were at the time, you were an adult, you tried to hijack an airplane to go to Israel to get out of the Soviet Union. How old were you at that time?
22.
And tell us the events on the airplane when you tried to do this.
No, it was on the airplane.
It was at the airport?
We had a whole group that bought tickets, like means all the passengers of the airplane should be Jewish, and a member of our fighting group. But obviously we were followed by the KGB. They didn't know about our preparation beforehand, so they just put a trap permitting us enter the airport, and then when it was announced boarding, we started going to the airport, to the airplane, which was on a very small airport, so we would walk by foot. They jumped out from the specific airplane, some paratroopers and police, and arrested us on the spot.
Arrested you. How many years were you sentenced to prison originally?
Originally was 15.
15 years.
For betraying the Russian motherland, and some 15 years for trying to harm state security, and then 7 years for illegal Jewish activities.
So
finally, it come to 12 years for, as everybody knows, at a certain point, the big struggle for flat-night people was started. It was immediately after the trial, after the verdict, for Mr. Dymshits, the head of the group, was put to death. And here people start acting to avoid it. It was Hanukkah time.
How old was he when he was?
He was, I believe, he was like 42.
Oh, he was an older man. He wasn't a young.
And then it was a miracle of Hanukkah, for after they passed the verdict on second candle of Hanukkah, on Zota Hanukkah, 8th candle, they canceled the death penalties, and my penalty as well, softened them. So Dymshits got instead only 15 years of imprisonment, and I only 12 years of imprisonment.
Now you were able to study in prison illegally, but you had actually Jewish books in prison and were able to study while you were in prison. How did you get the books into there? Were they smuggled in? Were they things that originally they said, okay, just take them? How did it all happen?
You know, in every prison, the guards are smuggling inside food and goods for money. So there is a prison, specifically in our compulsory labor camp, we have some 8 Jews. And we noticed that there are certain guards that would bring food, and we notified our relatives to approach them from another side of the prison, also just for money to bring some books. It worked.
Wow, wow, wow. So before I go on to about the books and everything, I want to talk about, I understand that Anatoly Sharansky, Natan Sharansky, was in prison at the same time. You were able to communicate using through the toilets and the sinks and so on. How was that? How did you do that? I heard about that and I said, that's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, by the way, he was arrested 7 years later after me. And that time I was sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment for keeping Shabbos, and moved to a certain Vladimir prison next to Moscow. And Sharansky at that time was sentenced himself to spend his time in the specific prison. For later on we were separated and never could communicate. But it's very easy, you know, you take water from the sink, from the basin, and you call, you like shout there in the basin, whom you are looking for to talk to, and then people are listening in the hall, you know. All the prison is connected with the tubes, and so it's like a telephone.
So you put your ear to the actual sinkhole and were able to listen and talk into it?
Yeah, like, you know, beautifully, easily. Also, it was considered like a violation of the regime, so some of it would happen in a cell. So one of the prisoners would stand and close, there is a small eye to watch whatever is going on in the cell. He would, with his body, to cover the eye, and then we could speak. The moment the guard would come, for they could listen that somebody is talking in a different way, immediately we stop and make a break. Sometimes they would catch us and punish for that.
So at one point, all of your books were confiscated, everything you were studying, all these books that were smuggled in for you, and you went on a hunger strike. How long was your hunger strike?
2 months.
How do you live for 2 months on a hunger strike? What intake did you have? Did you drink water? How does it work, and how did you do it and survive for 2 months? Because many people who more than a month of a hunger strike, they end up dying.
We would announce it. It was common with prisoners to announce that we are drinking water. For obviously, if you don't drink and don't eat, you will pass away for a week. For a week, not enough. As far as I planned to pass the knowledge of my hunger strike to Human Rights Commission of UN, it had to take time, it should be prolonged. So I figured that I can keep like some 100 days. And with God's help, the information was smuggled out from the prison by an Ukrainian man, a nationalist, that passed it over to Refusenik in Moscow, and then it come to UN Human Rights Commission, and then immediately they give me back some books, not all of them, but I felt that, that still it's like taking care of your health as well, for I planned to go to Israel and to serve there in an army. I had to be in a good shape, so I stopped.
Absolutely. You edited an underground newsletter on Jewish issues. Who received the newsletter? How did you get it out? And how did you get caught eventually? What was the situation connected to this?
1969. Around this time, like in the end of 1968, all underground groups all over Soviet Russia established a joint committee.
1966 is when your student group formed.
Yeah. 1968, before that, during 1968, and 66, and 7, 8, etc., we managed to establish good relations with other underground groups in Soviet Russia, and then we established this coordination committee, and I was appointed to be an editor of underground newspaper, so I was not alone, I was a part of a big thing, so it was easy rather to collect information what's going on in every specific city, and then I had some more co-editors. We would put all information we would collect for a month, put together, print it on the typewriting machine, and then make to photograph it, making positives, and we could print in this way some not more than 150 copies, and then naturally we would send it to our groups in different cities, in Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, Odessa, so it was easy.
You were known as a prisoner of Zion. People in Israel were praying for you, were supporting you. Around the world. You wrote an autobiography. Your autobiography came out talking about your life, and then you also put this book together, Unbroken Spirit. Very, very popular book for people who read in this genre. And this really talks about your whole situation from growing up, from the trying to hijack the airplane, and your time in prison until finally when you were able to go on Aliyah. But before you went on an Aliyah, when you were released from prison, you actually were being an activist for Aliyah already in the Soviet Union, weren't you?
Yeah, sure. To make a difference when you are by yourself, you decide what to do. The moment you became a citizen of Israel, there is a Jewish agency and there are other organizations, so it is not easy to continue your activities. Still, we established with Natalie Sharansky in the end of the 80s, so-called Zionist Forum, that we felt it should be the biggest organization to absorb Russian Jews, absorbing Russian Jews, that we know better. But later on it was ruined by the establishment. They didn't like it.
So Unbroken Spirit came out in 2012,
right.
Your book. Tell me what...
Thanks, Jews in Chicago. See, here is a list of people that donated for this edition. Where is the name? Okay, but you will find the list of all people that you, I believe.
Oh, a lot of Chicagoans.
Yeah.
And
the head of it, certainly Pen Cohen, the head of National Council for Soviet Jewry, that called me up and suggested to publish the book in English.
Very
so
nice.
It was very expensive, and she did it. So in fact, it is not me that published the book, it is her and people from Chicago.
Very good. If you get the book, it's on page 13 of the foreword in the book, Unbroken Spirit. In writing your book, Did it bring back sadness and emotions because you had to recall everything in detail? You know, it's one thing when you tell a story, oh, this happened to me, this happened to me. It's another thing when you have to start to write down all the details and go through it all. Was it very hard for you?
Not at all. Just to mention that I wrote the book. In fact, it is a translation from Russian version, and then it was translated in Hebrew. Only now, later, I mean, only like 25 years later, it was translated in English. So when I come to Israel, I sat down and I wrote it like a diary, like my memories, without, you know, never sadness, never being angry with anybody.
Because a lot of people, for example, Holocaust survivors,
Right.
they have a hard time talking about
It's
it,
different.
what they went through. I know it's different, I know it's different, but that's why I asked that.
I'm a talkative person, so
uh.
it was not that difficult for me to
Very
put it
nice.
on the pages.
Very nice. So you came to Israel, and first you moved to Israel. It was a big change for you, obviously. What did you do?
I was myself a Hebrew teacher in underground in Russia, and then I studied more smuggling the textbooks in a labor camp. So when I come, I was in command of some 10,000 Hebrew words and expression I could easily read and write. So I never went to Nepal.
You never went to Nepal.
And,
so what do you do when you come to Israel with this change of life? All of a sudden you're leaving the Soviet Union after being in prison, after going through all these experiences. How do you adjust to a free life in a new country?
I prepared to it. Being I felt being even in the prison that I am like a war prisoner. That I am an Israeli in custody by the Soviets. So when I come, I had no difficulties to adjust. I had my language, I had my knowledge in Yiddishkeit, whatever. So and I immediately entered to study in yeshiva. And being in yeshiva, then in half a year I met an Israeli girl. We married. You know, as, your wife is always your educator. So I got an Israeli educator to train me to be an Israeli. It's much more easier that it's done on everyday basis, right?
Yeah.
So my Hebrew is Israeli without Russian pronunciation, and my children are Israelis. For my wife is not Russian. So it was helpful.
And are all your children and grandchildren all in Israel right now?
Yeah, sure.
They're all there. That's great. That's great. You go around speaking about this, obviously, not just talking about your book, but just talking about your experiences to educate people about all this. And you yourself were an activist for Jonathan Pollard, weren't you?
Yeah, sure. But it was not that easy. You know that there were all kinds of approaches, you know, how to do that. And I as an activist, try to do it in an active way. You know, making protest demonstrations, sit-in and hunger strike. And later on, like it sounded like somebody from Jonathan Pollard, a pastor, that what I am doing is not helpful for him, and I stopped.
I am here with Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich. He is a former Soviet prisoner, prisoner of conscience, Refusenik, as his father was also arrested before him when he was a young boy in the struggle of Soviet Jewry. He's also one of the people that made Aliyah for the Soviet Union, something that became a regular thing, and we know how many thousands and thousands of millions of Jews have emigrated to Israel from the Soviet Union. Stay with us here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. We'll be right back with Rabbi Mendelevich.
Hello, my name is Yisrael Oman, and you're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug.
We're back here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. I'm here with Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich. He is a former Soviet prisoner of conscience, a former Refusenik, who also was very influential in causing the big influx of Soviet emigration of Jews to Israel and to America. so many Jews went to Israel, but there are those who left Israel and came to America, and those who came straight to America. Do you feel that those people who came straight to America or left Israel, do you think that they did something bad? Is it something that bothers you? What is your opinion about that?
To begin with, I am glad that I was helpful in bringing freedom, for we value it as a value, the freedom of every human being. And we, in Soviet Russia, we were slaves, not only Jewish people, everybody was a slave, and I am glad that we did whatever we did in Egypt 1,000 years ago, that brought freedom and the concept of freedom to everybody there in Soviet Russia. Of course, I would be more glad them coming to Israel, but I cannot blame them for the kind of education that each of us got. We were brainwashed, forcibly assimilated, so it's obvious that the majority has no connection to Israel. More than that, nowadays, I know that American Russian Jewry is a strong partisan of Israel. Like sending their children to serve in the Israel army, sending money, having one kind of organization against BDS or whatever. So it's good, I'm glad for this part.
Very nice, very nice. And I know that those people are very, have a karatatov for you, thankfulness for you, because they might not have ever been able to emigrate if it weren't for you and people like you. Tell me, you went to yeshiva when you went to Israel, you started a family, and then you went for advanced degrees in university. How does one make it in Israel and do all these things at the same time, especially after the big change of life after being a prisoner for so long?
It's, one of the miracles that happened in my life. You could better ask how a regular student in a university in Riga became a hijacker. It's more miracle than being a rabbi to have getting courses in a university. It is easy. And then, I studied electronics in Riga, in Latvia, my native place. Studying Jewish history is come together with Jewish religion. It never contradicts. And I am involved very much before even start my studies. I was involved in Jewish history. So I love it very much.
Very nice. So at the point of your life, when you started to study Judaism and become more knowledgeable, at what point would you consider yourself to have been a frum, an Orthodox Jew or observant Jew, because obviously you weren't able to do that as a child. At what point of your life would you say you became observant, and obviously when you went to Israel you were really able to be an Orthodox Jew in the full sense? Where did that come along?
I believe it was a slow development, step-to-step development, and when still in Soviet Russia and before being arrested. And it was like a normal consequence when you are fighting for freedom to go to Israel and to come back to your heritage. So the second step is to come back really to your roots. Heritage doesn't mean too much if you are really not connected to whatever Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov passed over to generations. So it's my natural development, being not like something special happened in my life. Sometimes people, make tshuva that something special happens in their life, being ill in a hospital or something bad with their relatives. It was a consequence, I'm educated as a logical man, and it was for me obvious. If you are teaching other people to come to Israel, you have to be yourself, and somebody that will be an example for them.
Wonderful. So Rabbi Mendelevich, today you are speaking and teaching at Machon Meir at the yeshiva in Yerushalayim in Jerusalem, and students are benefiting from not only your knowledge of Torah and teaching, but from your telling them your experiences as well. When you go around and travel around the world as a scholar in residence, as a Shabbaton guest, and speak, do a lot of Russian Jews come to your events because they're in awe of you and inspired by you for all these years?
Yeah, and it depends on the organization. I'm ready to speak in any language, in Russian, in Hebrew, in Yiddish, in English. But to organize, to bring people together, it depends on local activities. So if it comes, for example, I was recently in Boca and in Miami, and mostly with Chabad people. And there was specific Chabad-based Chabad for Russian Jews. So I enjoyed, to speak Mama-Loshen.
So this was something else I was going to ask you. When you were a little boy growing up, what was your first language at home?
As a matter of fact, as I mentioned, my parents are from Dymshits, and they did never know any other language except of Yiddish. So they spoke at home Yiddish, and I know Yiddish. But then, when Russian occupied Soviet Russia, the language became Russian. So I believe my Mama-Loshen is still Russian language more than Yiddish. And
did you learn English while you were still in Russia, or did English come after you went to Israel?
Yeah, being in a prison, in the university, Latvia is like a German country. We studied in university German language, I know German. And then I felt that it's not enough for, if specifically being in a prison, I felt that the moment I will be released, I have to go around and tell people the stories, and not in German language certainly. So I started studying myself English in the prison, and it's how I developed. There were some defectors, Russian diplomats, like Putin didn't know good English, so I had some moral practice before being released.
So just in closing, because our time is running out, I'm interested, have you ever been back to Russia since, or to Latvia since Glasnost, since freedom of travel has come along?
Yeah, many times, and even only recently I visited a lot of Russian cities, and I am going every yahrzeit of my mother to Riga cemetery, so I'm familiar with Riga as well.
Very nice.
It differs, it's different.
Do you still have relatives there? Do you still have cousins that are living in the former Soviet Union?
I have a cousin in Moscow that his father and his mother were killed by Stalin in 1938. So from his childhood, he was an orphan. And there was a special, orphan house for children of enemies of the Soviet power. So he's an older man nowadays.
But still an amazing story. Wow. Well, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. This has been amazing for me to have you here and to hear your story. Rabbi Yosef Mendelevich.
Not the whole story.
No, not the whole story. That's, if they want the whole story, or at least most of it, Unbroken Spirit by Yosef Mendelevich, former prisoner of conscience. If you want more information or want to contact Rabbi Mendelevich, send us an email, info@tvrabbi.com. I will forward it to him, and I know he'll get back to you personally. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com. You can see former shows on the web and see this show on the web as well. Rabbi Mendelevich, once again, merchaba to Chicago, and we hope to see you again. Be gesund, in good health for many years. And hope to see you all next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.
I'm talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug on your TV show. Well, he's the rabbi for me. Anytime you need. You're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.